So my name is Brian Rutledge. I'm the CSAC Programs and Grants Director over here at the California Counties Foundation. Excited to have folks joining us this morning to talk about cybersecurity infrastructure for broadband and making sure that we can get counties funding. I'll turn it over to Christy Moore, our partner at the Ferguson Group, but just wanted to say hello from CSAC and keep in mind that this will be uploaded to our website. You can share it with folks in the future if they didn't see it. The questions function is turned off, but you can still direct inquiries to the panelists. So folks publicly can't see it, but we will respond to that in moderated Q&A sections throughout this webinar. So welcome this morning. Turning it over to you, Christy.
Thank you, Brian. I'm Christy Moore. I'm a managing partner for TFG. TFG is the lead on the CSAC Grants Initiative, and our grants team is providing grant services to all California counties through the initiative. And also part of that is these trainings. This is our second and a series that we're doing this summer on specific topics of importance that were really based on what the counties and what you had expressed your needs are for your communities and your counties. So I'm very excited to be able to turn it over to the full team. I'm going to have actually the entire TFG team for the CSAC initiative, grants initiative on. I'm just going to have them wave just for efficiency and brevity. But you'll see these names quite frequently as we do research for you and provide the services to you. We actually have David Hoover on, who is not a member of the grants team, but he is our broadband and cybersecurity expert at TFG. So we've invited him to be a guest speaker on today's webinar as well. So with that, I think we're going to get into the heart of the conversation here and the presentation. So the webinar is broken up into two sections. We're going to be talking about broadband funding opportunities and cybersecurity funding opportunities. We're going to start with broadband. I'm going to turn it over to the team here to kind of get into some of the hot broadband grants available to counties. I do want to mention that these aren't all of the programs available to counties for broadband related purposes. We're just highlighting some of the larger ones and some of the newer ones. So we'll have resources for you that provide information on all grant programs available to counties on these opportunities. So today we're just going to feature a few of them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the team.
Thank you much, Christy. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon, and we look forward to providing some good information for you on different grants available. But we'll start off first, as Christy mentioned, with broadband and specifically the Rural E-Connectivity Loan and Grant Program, or ReConnect. So this program offers federal loans, grants, and loan grant combinations to help get broadband to rural areas that lack sufficient broadband access, and that's defined as 100 megabits per second downstream and 20 megabits upstream. Proposed facilities funded by ReConnect must be capable of delivering 100 megabits symmetrical service to every premise in the proposed funded service area at the same time. And any technology that can deliver 100 megabits symmetrical service at the same time to every premise is eligible for funding. So that's everything from fiber to fixed wireless. It just has to meet that 100 megabit symmetrical service requirement. Eligible applicants can either be a nonprofit or a for-profit organization and must take one of the following forms: a corporation, limited liability companies, or limited liability partnerships, of course, cooperatives or mutual organizations. Importantly for CSAC, states, local governments, or any agency, subdivision, or political subdivision thereof, a territory, or an Indian tribe. Individuals and legal general partnerships are not eligible entities. In addition, co-applicants are not eligible. And if two entities want to partner in delivering broadband to areas without sufficient access, one entity must take the lead on submitting an application. However, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, limited liability partnerships are considered eligible entities, and they must have at least two partners in the relationship. So getting to the areas that are eligible, only areas where at least 50% of households lack access to 120 megabit service are eligible for reconnect funding. So if fewer than 50% of the households in an area lack access to 120 megabit service, the area is not eligible to be served. USDA Rural Development uses several methods to verify whether a particular PFSA currently has 100 megabits downstream and 120 megabits upstream broadband service. It will post a public notice filing of the proposed service area on their WeConnect webpage, and service providers in those areas can submit a public notice response indicating whether they already provide that service. Then USDA will conduct a service area validation within the areas of the PFSA where that public notice response is filed. Since the intent of the Reconnect program is to bring high-speed broadband service to rural residences and businesses, standalone middle mile projects are not eligible. However, middle mile facilities are eligible if they are necessary to bring sufficient broadband service to all premises in the PFSA. As I mentioned earlier, there are 5 types of funding available within this FOA, and this graph basically shows an overview of the different requirements and other obligations for each of these programs. The 100% loan in round 4, which was the last funding cycle, a total of up to $150 million was available for loans. The maximum amount that could be requested in an application was $50 million. For the 50% loan, 50% grant combination, up to $150 million was available in round 4. The maximum amount that could be requested in an application was $25 million for the loan and $25 million for the grant. The loan and grant amounts will always be equal, and that will probably be the same case for round 5. For the 100% grant, up to $150 million was available in round 4. The maximum amount of grant funds that could be requested in an application was $25 million. The maximum amount an applicant may request increases to $35 million if the applicant demonstrates that the PFSA is comprised 100% of areas classified by the USDA Economic Research Service as frontier and remote level 4 areas. And an area meets that level 4 designation if it is a rural area located 15 minutes or more from an urban area of 2,500 to approximately 10,000 people, and 30 minutes or more from an urban area of 10,000 to almost 25,000 people, and so on and so forth. There's several categories for that. And for the 100% grant program for tribal governments, colonias, basically persistent poverty areas or socially vulnerable communities, up to $350 million was available for grants in round 4, and the maximum amount of grants funded that could be requested in an application was $25 million. So if an applicant demonstrates that the PFSA is comprised 100% of locations with areas classified by the FAR level 4, the applicant can request up to $35 million. And then finally, projects proposing to serve areas where 90% of the households lack sufficient access to broadband, up to $200 million was available for grants in round 4, and the maximum amount of grant funds that could be requested in an application was $25 million. The requirement for at least 50% of the households to lack access to sufficient broadband service to be eligible does not apply to this category. Instead, for this funding source, not more than 10% of homes in the PFSA can have sufficient access to broadband. Other information to know, currently a match is not required for applications submitted under the 100% grant for tribal areas, or for projects where 90% of households lack sufficient access to broadband. So that's good news for those areas. And the interest rate for the 100% loans is fixed at 2%, while the interest rate for the loan portion of the loan grant combinations is set at the U.S. Treasury rate for the remaining period of time in advance of each of the funds. In the Community Connect program, this grant program offers financial assistance to eligible applicants that will construct broadband networks that provide service at or above broadband speed to all premises in rural, economically challenged communities where broadband service does not exist. Generally, projects will provide community-oriented connectivity to stimulate economic development and provide enhanced educational and healthcare opportunities in rural areas. Priority will be given to rural areas that demonstrate the greatest need for broadband service. The broadband projects must deliver a speed of 100 megabits downstream and 120 megabits upstream for fixed terrestrial broadband service, whether that's fixed, such as fiber, or wireless, like a fixed wireless service. Eligible areas are those that lack broadband speed of at least 25 down and 3 megabits up. The PFSA must be a contiguous geographic area located entirely within an eligible rural area in which the 25 down and 3 up broadband service does not exist, and where the applicant proposes to offer 120 megabit services to all residential and business customers. And the PFSA may consist of multiple municipalities and may be located in more than one state. Eligible applicants include state and local governments, federally recognized tribes, cooperatives, nonprofits, for-profit corporations, and limited liability companies. An eligible project cost include the construction, acquisition, or leasing of facilities, spectrum, land, or buildings used to deploy broadband service. And the cost of providing the 100 down 20 megabit up broadband service must be free of charge to all participating essential community facilities within that proposed funded service area for at least 2 years. And the essential community facility is defined as a public improvement operated on a nonprofit basis, needed for the orderly development of a rural community, where the rural community is a city, town, or an equivalent county or multi-county area. And some of the examples of essential community facilities include like healthcare facilities and services, including hospitals, fire, rescue, and public safety facilities or services, community, public, social, educational, or cultural facilities or services, and community parks, community activity centers, and similar types of facilities. It also includes the cost of providing a community center within the PFSA with a minimum of 2 and up to 10 computer access points and wireless access at the 100 down 20 megabit up broadband service speed to all users for at least 2 years free of charge. And less than 10% of the grant amount, or up to $150,000, may be used for the improvement, expansion, construction, or acquisition of a community center that provides online access to the public. Importantly, Community Connect funds may not be used to duplicate costs, services, connections, facilities, or equipment that have been authorized under such areas. And for the next opportunity, we have the Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program. This program is funded by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. They are planning and implementation programs that provide funding to promote digital inclusion and advanced equity for all. The programs aim to ensure that all communities can access and use affordable, reliable, high-speed internet to meet their needs and improve their lives. There are 3 Digital Equity Act programs: the State Planning Grant Program, which is a $60 million formula grant program for states, territories, and tribal governments to develop state digital equity plans. There's the State Capacity Grant Program, which is a $1.44 billion formula grant program for states, territories, and tribal governments that will fund an annual grant program for 5 years in support of digital equity projects and the implementation of digital equity plans. My colleague Heidi will have more information on that program. And finally, the Competitive Grant Program, which is a $1.25 billion program that will fund an annual competitive grant for 5 years to implement digital equity projects. Private sector, public sector, and non-for-profit entities can apply for these funds. There is a timing sequence for these 3 programs under the Act. States interested in participating in the Capacity Grant Program must first apply for the state planning grants. Upon receipt of those planning funds, states have 1 year to complete their digital equity plans. The digital equity plan is a critical predicate for achievement of digital equity goals, as the drafting of that plan provides states the opportunity to cast a vision for and really think critically about how they will support the achievement of digital equity in their states. Many states have already drafted their plans and are either seeking public comment right now or have finished incorporating public comments and have finalized their plans. And once completed, states will be eligible to apply for funds to implement the plans through the State Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program. And the law does require NTIA to establish the competitive grant program not later than 30 days after the NTIA begins awarding state digital equity capacity grants. There are several examples of eligible uses of these funds across all 3 programs: developing, implementing, and overseeing digital equity plans, making awards to other entities to help in developing digital equity plans, improving the online accessibility and inclusivity of public resources, implementing digital equity plans and digital inclusion activities, providing digital literacy and skills education to covered populations, and facilitating the adoption of high-speed internet by covered populations. So that's a quick overview of some of the key broadband programs that we should be looking at. There is a map. If you go to the USDA RUS Reconnect, they do have a map available that you can basically pull up your proposed funded service area and look to see whether or not there is broadband already provided in that area. And that's based off of the state broadband maps and, of course, also the FCC's national broadband map, which was recently updated. So there is that capability to go in and see whether or not the broadband exists in your PFSA.
David did a really great overview of some of the grants that are coming up for broadband, but as David intimated during his discussion, it sounds like some of the federal funding that's out there is predominantly going towards state programs to states. So states are directly getting most of the funding. So how do counties really access that, and what programs are out there that counties can actually apply to through the state to access some of these federal funds trickling down? So the first program I'm going to talk about is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, BEAD program. And so I'm going to just refer to it from BEAD from now on. This program was funded by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law as a $42.45 billion federal grant program that aims to get all Americans online by funding partnerships between states or territories, communities, and stakeholders to build infrastructure to where it is needed and to increase adoption of high-speed internet. This program really lays the critical groundwork for widespread access, affordability, equity, and adoption of broadband. It also is geared towards creating good paying jobs, growing economic opportunities, including for local workers, and providing increased access to healthcare services, enrich educational experiences for students, and close long-standing equity gaps and improve the overall quality of life for Americans. The BEAD program, that when it's released on the federal level, only allows states to apply for the opportunity. However, the BIL stated in its program regulations that there needs to be an opportunity for community members and local governments like counties to access some of those funds. So in California, BEAD is being implemented by the California Public Utilities Commission, CPUC. California has been allocated approximately $1.86 billion under the BEAD program, based on the federal government's calculations of California's share of unserved locations nationally. The program's principal focus is on deploying broadband services to unserved locations, which is defined as those without any broadband service at all, or with broadband services offering speeds below 25 megabits per second downstream and 3 megabits per second upstream. They are also prioritizing underserved locations defined as those without broadband service offerings at speeds of 100 megabits per second downstream and 20 megabits per second upstream. So as I mentioned, as part of the program, CPUC is required to gather public input in an open public proceeding to determine specifically how BEAD funds will be offered to qualified subgrantees, which could be counties. The federal rules for BEAD give the overall rules for the program, while CPUC currently is setting up the schedule for the competitive process of selecting subgrantees and specific requirements for those subgrantees must follow to build a robust, high-quality broadband network. These new networks will be built in federally defined eligible areas that are underserved and unserved communities across the state. BEAD-funded subgrantees may also build to community anchor institutions like schools or libraries, provided they are also currently meeting the unserved eligibility standards that I previously outlined. So when you're scoping your projects, you want to be focused on the unserved first and then the underserved. With the BEAD federal rules, the CPUC will have to establish subgrantee rules as mandated by the BEAD program itself for the required elements like workforce development and federal fair wages for those building the infrastructure. But the state, so CPUC, gets to define affordability standards for the completed new broadband system, as well as audit and risk assessment standards to protect against waste, fraud, and abuse as the networks are deployed. And so that is what the state is currently working on. The federal rules require the CPUC to submit a high-level 5-year action plan to NTIA, establishing California's broadband goals and priorities and serving as a comprehensive needs assessment that will inform California's forthcoming initial proposal, which is due to NTIA by the end of 2023. So the 5-year, high-level 5-year plan is currently had an open public comment period in California that closed a little bit earlier in August, and then they will be submitting a final one to NTIA. And in the meantime, the CPUC is working on developing the initial proposal, which will be due to NTIA at the end of the year. So the initial proposal, which again is due at the end of the year, establishes the rules for the BEAD program, which will include the requirements for the challenge process, how CPUC is going to select subgrantees, and other implementation details for the program. So counties will want to be monitoring the CPUC website to see their draft initial proposal, because there will be a comment period for it, for you to input on how you think the program is going to be developed. California is expected to release the initial proposal this fall for and counties should expect the subgrantee competition to occur in 2024 for the first time. So what can be used? What are the eligible uses for funds under this grant program? This program will serve projects like planning for the deployment of high-speed internet, including conducting research, collecting data, outreach, and training. Funds can also be used for deploying and upgrading internet in unserved and underserved areas, or improving service to community anchor organizations. Can be used for installing internet and Wi-Fi in multi-unit residential buildings, adoption of digital equity programs. And one thing that David mentioned earlier is, in the 5-year plan that is being published for the BEAD program, it also is going to include some of the digital equity planning elements that is required for a previous program spoken about. And then finally, funds can also be used for workforce development programs and vocational training, as broadband needs are, training needs are needed nationally. So the next grant program that I'm going to speak to that is flowing directly to the state, but counties will have an opportunity to access some of the funds, is the State Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program, which is a $1.4 billion formula grant to states, territories, Indian tribes, Alaska Native entities, and Native Hawaiian organizations. This program is going to be funded annually between fiscal years 2022 and 2026 in support of implementing digital equity plans, which the state is currently working on. California did receive or submit a grant to the Digital Equity Plans program offered through NTIA and is currently working on it. There has been a lot of opportunity for public input on the development of that plan. And the reason this is so important is that states interested in competing in this capacity grant program must first apply to the digital equity planning grants and complete its state digital equity plans. As David briefly overviewed, the state digital equity plans is very critical to achieve digital equity goals nationally, and drafting the plan will provide the state with the opportunity to cast its vision and critically think about how it will support the achievement of digital equity across California. The planning process is meant to bring in a diverse set of stakeholders to the table, assess data, and more to ensure that the capacity funding is used most effectively to close the digital divide in California. Again, California has submitted its application for the planning grant, which is currently under consideration. So once that planning grant is approved and they submit, they get their plan approved by NTIA, the State Digital Equity Capacity Program will have to begin no later than 2 years after NTIA begins awarding the state digital equity planning grants. And upon receipt of the planning funds, states will have 1 year to complete their digital equity plan. And then once they complete their equity plan, they will be eligible to apply for funds to implement their capacity grants. And that's where counties will have the opportunity to submit their projects for digital equity consideration in the state's program. And so we're anticipating the solicitation for this to come out in 2024.
Thank you so much, Heidi. I've magically transformed my location and broadband to upgrade my access. I wanted to ask, if you're a CSAC member, your county going through these federally sponsored programs, how do you even find the grants, and where should we be looking for these funds? It seems like it's coming out of multiple directions.
That is very true. So the aside from using the CSAC office hours, I would definitely point counties to be looking at NTIA's really interactive broadband federal funding guide. The NTIA releases this guide on an annual basis to enhance Broadband USA's one-stop federal funding site. The guide provides interactive step-by-step approaches for users to filter through more than 70 funding opportunities for various federal agencies that would support broadband. What is important to note about this guide is that broadband might not be the prime focus or intent for those programs that are listed in it. So while these programs that you'll find in the guide could support some broadband type of project, it likely for some of them, for example, for those coming out of HUD, would need to have some type of housing driver behind it. So it's very important when you go through the guide that you understand that while broadband is an eligible activity within some of these programs, they are not the focal point or the focus of it. The great thing about this guide, though, is it gives you a very quick way to whittle down some of the programs, and it highlights general information about each program. It includes program descriptions, important dates, contact information, and links to program websites. These guides were developed in response to feedback from users from federal funding sites, and the interactive guide can be used both offline and online across multiple programs. So this is a really great spot to kind of go through. What you see on this in that table is just a snapshot of some of the programs which local governments are eligible to apply for, and what those programs focus is, or what you could submit a broadband project for under those programs.
Thanks so much for that. And then can I ask to go further, how should a county, a CSAC member be thinking about getting ready to compete for these funds?
So I would love to talk about this subject, because this is something that we talk about with all of our grants and all the people that we work with, actually, is try and get yourself ready to apply for a grant before that solicitation comes out. We always say, I don't remember the percentage, Christy can tell us, like 80% of having a successful grant is being ready before the solicitation drops, and then 20% is writing. I think those are the percentages. Anyway, so the first thing that you really need to do is start pulling your data. And that includes doing a complete service assessment. So here you want to identify the areas that need to be improved and any assets that can be leveraged in the process. You're also going to want to identify those areas that Heidi spoke about that are unserved, that have the speeds below 25 megabits per second for downstream and 3 for upstream, and also take it a step further for underserved, for those speeds below 100 and for downstream and 20 for upstream. You'll also want to document your demand for broadband services. Here, you really want to get a good understanding of how individuals and businesses are actually utilizing broadband. And one of the best ways that you could do that is just to do a survey of the different households and businesses and see what they're using, how they're using it, how often they're using it, get a good feel. You're going to want to map your community infrastructure assets. So using a geomapping tool, you want to locate all the things that are going to be used in the project. So you want to locate your conduits, ducts, etc., all of the actual things, as well as the institutions, businesses, and residents that are interested in improving their broadband. You'll also want to map out any electric co-ops infrastructure assets, including meters, cabinets, fiber, rights of way, etc., all of those things. And finally, we suggest talking with other service providers, ISPs, utilities, co-ops. Ask about what future plans they may have and what can be done to encourage deployment, perhaps work together. And then on going further, we also want you to work on identifying your community champions and supporters. So community involvement and participation is really big in all of the federal grant space right now, even in the very, very technical grants. So you're going to want to reach out to local community groups who will provide support for your project. One of the big topics that we're seeing across all of the grant space is making sure that disadvantaged communities are actually receiving the benefits from federally funded projects. So you want to identify and partner with community groups who will ensure that these communities are being represented and actually receiving benefits. And also you're going to want to explore working with project partners. In addition to the community groups, you want to build relationships with these partners, entities who will provide financial support, perhaps offer incentives for services, maybe serve on a community advisory board, provide general outreach, really be a big part of your program. You can also work to take steps to ease potential service providers access to utility poles and rights of way. So we want to make sure that everybody works together and everything goes smoothly when the time comes. So for pole attachments, you want to make sure that your project partners have access to the poles. Make ready, hang fiber in the power space versus the communication space. And during installation, establish your responsibilities and procedures for fiber installation down to the discussion of labor costs. Back to collecting more data, conduct your engineering study, get going on this. This is a very important step. If you can start the process, work with your partner and a provider to identify the best locations to actually deploy the broadband. And finally, start exploring some financial incentives. Do your research, look into all those options that Heidi talked about, or contact us through our office hours. We want to look to see what sort of opportunities are available in the bipartisan infrastructure law to help see what may be applicable to your specific project.
We had a question asking about the eligibility for the digital equity competitive grants, if they were local governments or is that at the state level? David Hoover answered that question in the Q&A box, but the answer is that private sector, public sector, and not-for-profit entities can apply for those grants or those funds. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody got that information on the question that was answered. So thank you, Jasmine, for the question. We got another question too about the sharing of information on the grants, and I mentioned it earlier, but we will be following up with all attendees and participants with information on each of these grant programs as follow-up to the webinar. So that is coming as well.
Are there any grants that can't be layered on top of or in addition to other grants? Good question.
There are rules with every grant program as to how much federal funding can be go towards one project. And so each of the grant guidelines will stipulate how much, or if there is a cap or is not a cap on whether or not your singular project can receive funds from various sources. Typically, these programs have like up to a 90% or 80% federal funding that can go to one single project. You just have to be mindful of the required matches for each of the programs and how all the funding pots interact. I know that the state of California has released several grant programs and will be releasing more grant programs over through the end of 2023 and into 2024. And the Last Mile FFA program is currently out there right now. Those programs can likely be layered into some of these other grants that exist that we talked about earlier, because most of that funding is actually just state funding. So it really depends on the source of where those grants are coming from and what the federal regulations say.
Great question. So keep them coming, especially as we get into the final section that we're going to talk about is cybersecurity funding opportunities. Again, I'm going to turn it over to the team to go over some of the hot and new grant opportunities for counties related to cybersecurity. Again, this isn't everything out there. There are some opportunities that go beyond what we're going to discuss today, but we're just highlighting some of the larger opportunities or the new opportunities that have recently been released. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the team.
Thank you, Christy. I will give an overview of the Rural and Municipal Utilities Advanced Cybersecurity Grant and Technical Assistance Program. This is a program that was established by the Department of Energy and to provide grants and technical assistance for utilities to detect, respond to, and recover from cybersecurity threats. And the objectives of the program are to deploy advanced cybersecurity technologies for electric utility systems and to increase the participation of eligible entities in cybersecurity threat information sharing programs. Priority will be given to applicants with the following. They have limited cybersecurity resources. They own assets critical to the reliability of the bulk power system, or they own critical electric infrastructure. Eligible applicants include utilities owned by a political subdivision of the state, rural electric cooperatives, utilities owned by an agency, authority, corporation, or instrumentality of one of the political subdivisions of a state, nonprofit entities that are in partnership with not fewer than 6 entities listed above, and finally, investor-owned electric utilities that sell less than 4 million megawatt hours of electricity per year. The programs focus on small and medium-sized electric utilities, particularly public power and rural electric cooperative utilities, is definitely a welcome development. A total of $250 million will be made available to support awards through this program for 4 fiscal years. We were expecting the notice of funding opportunity to be released this summer along with the application window, but it appears that will be delayed until sometime this fall. When this program was announced late last summer, throughout the fall period, there were several opportunities, webinars for the public to be involved and provide feedback. The DOE also initiated a request for information too. And through all that data collection and information collection that DOE did, they were putting together that NOFO. Has not been released this yet, as I mentioned, but we expect that to be coming forthcoming with that application window, hoping to open sometime this fall. We have the state and local cybersecurity grant program. This is a Department of Homeland Security grant. They announced the FY23 program just recently, back August 7th. The goal of this program is to assist local, state, and territorial governments with managing and reducing systemic cyber risk. The program enables DHS to make targeted cybersecurity investments in state, local, and territorial government agencies, thus improving the security of critical infrastructure and the resilience of the services that state, local, and territorial governments provide to their communities. The grant program, now in its 2nd year, will dole out funds to help governments assess and evaluate individual projects being undertaken and adopt key cybersecurity best practices and federal cybersecurity performance goals. The focus is a change from last year's program, which asked applicants to develop governance structures and a cybersecurity plan to help respond to incidents and ensure continuity of operations. But as states and territories should have completed these tasks, applicants are now being asked to focus on a new set of objectives. So some of the eligible purposes, FEMA and the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, CSAC, they created a series of overarching goals and objectives for the grant program based on input from state and local government stakeholders and associations and consideration of national priorities and frameworks and the national cyber threat environment. Some of those priorities include implementing, as I mentioned, cyber governance and planning, assessing and evaluating systems and capabilities, mitigating prioritized issues, and building a cybersecurity workforce, another huge important objective. During FY22 program year last year, the applicants, as I mentioned, focused on establishing and developing governance structures. For the FY23 program year, applicants were required to focus on implementing their cybersecurity plans by addressing the following program objectives: understanding their current cybersecurity posture, and areas for improvement based on continuous testing, evaluation, and structured assessments, implementing security protections commensurate with risk, and then ensuring organizational personnel are appropriately trained in cybersecurity, commensurate with their responsibility. To support the FY23 grant requirements, cybersecurity plans must include the following activities. As I mentioned, conducting the assessment and evaluations as the basis for individual projects throughout the life of the program, and adopting key cybersecurity best practices. The eligible entities for this program are all the 50 US states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the territories. And the eligible entities are required to pass through 80% of their total funding to local government subrecipients, including at least 25% of that funding to rural areas. The FY23 grant NOFO defines a rural area as any area with a population of less than 50,000 individuals. And under this program, local governments are defined as county, municipality, city, town, townships, local public authorities, school districts, special districts, councils of governments, other regional or interstate government entities or agencies of local governments. It also includes Indian tribes and related tribal organizations. As far as the funding amount, in FY23, there's approximately $374.9 million of funding available. All the 50 states will receive a minimum of, or have received a minimum of at least $2 million in funding, with the remaining funding being appropriated based on the entity's overall population and population located in the rural area. California did receive an allocation of about $15.9 million. The application window opened on August 7th, and the submission deadline is October 6th.
And I just want to add that how can these local governments, so counties, access this program? So right now, Cal OES has established a cybersecurity task force, which is developing the plans. Counties can reach out to Cal OES to get added onto their distribution list, to get updated about where they are in the planning process and how they're going to distribute that 80% to local governments as required by the statute. So I do know that they are trying to get something out by the end of the year, the last time I checked in with them. But if your county has not already done so, please reach out to Cal OES to make sure that you're on that distribution list. And if your county has not engaged in any of their task force or community outreach events, I would highly recommend. This is a great opportunity for you guys to really get further insight into what Cal OES is planning and how they're going to distribute that requirement of 80%. So the next program that can support some type of cybersecurity initiative that I'm going to speak to is FEMA's State and Homeland Security Program, which is part of FEMA's overall Homeland Security Grant Program. So the Homeland Security Grant Program, the purpose of that program, which includes 3 grants, two which I'm going to speak to today, the State Homeland Security Program and the Urban Area Security Initiative, that it encompasses the Homeland Security Grant Program, which the main goal of this is to support states and local efforts to prevent terrorism and other catastrophic events, to help prepare the nation for threats and hazards that pose the greatest risk to security in the United States. So the State Homeland Security Program assists states, tribes, territories, and local preparedness activities that address high priority preparedness gaps across all core capabilities where a nexus to terrorism exists. So that includes cyber terrorism. The State Homeland Security Program supports the implementation of risk-driven, capabilities-based state of Homeland Security strategies to address the capabilities, targets set in the urban area, state, and regional threat, hazard identification, and risk assessment, also known as a THERA. The capability targets are established during the THERA process and assessed in the state preparedness report, and informs planning, organization, equipment, training, and exercises needed to prevent, protect against, mitigate, respond to, and recover from acts of terrorism and other catastrophic events. So each state Homeland Security program applicant must dedicate a minimum spend amount identified below where applicable as a percentage of total of their total state Homeland Security allocation across national priority areas. And there are 6 national priority areas that the state of California, which has 57 million allocation, is going to have to spend. And so these 6 national priority areas include a minimum spend of 3% going towards enhancing the protection of soft targets in crowded places, a minimum of 3% going towards enhancing information and intelligence sharing and analysis, a minimum of 3% on combating domestic violent extremism, no minimum spend requirement for enhancing cybersecurity, although it is a national priority area, and a minimum of 3% spending on enhancing community preparedness and resilience. And new to the fiscal year 2023 application was a minimum 3% on enhancing election security. For the enhancing cybersecurity national priority area, as I mentioned, there's no minimum spend requirements. However, FEMA is strongly encouraging recipients of this funding to make the investment in this area as it is a critical national concern. So it's very important, even though it isn't, has not been mandated in a spend account, that these projects get taken seriously. So this grant is typically released on the federal level every spring, and counties have the opportunity to submit projects through its county or operational area, which decides what projects to put forward for consideration to the state. Working with the counties and operational area local governing body to prioritize, the counties should be working with them to prioritize cybersecurity projects to ensure that they're given due consideration when selecting projects to submit up to the federal government. So this program, basically, you know, the state is getting the chunk of money, and then each county operational area can submit projects up to the state for consideration, and then the state will decide which projects it's going to put forth to FEMA for funding. So again, you're going to be wanting to work on your local and regional levels to make sure that your projects are under consideration. This grant comes out on the federal level in the spring, and typically the local and regional areas are working kind of like in the summertime on selecting the projects to submit up to the state and to FEMA in the fall. So the urban area security initiative is also part of the overall Homeland Security grant program offered by FEMA. The Urban Area Security Initiative is also known as UASI, and it addresses the unique risk-driven and capability-based planning, organization, equipment, training, and exercise needs of high-threat, high-density urban areas based on the capability targets identified during the threat and hazard identification and risk assessment process, as well as the associated assessment efforts. And it assists them in building an enhanced and sustainable capacity to prevent, protect against, mitigate, respond to, and recover from acts of terrorism. Within California, there are 6 UASI areas that each get their own designated allocation. So counties that are located within those designated 6 UOSIs have the opportunity to work with them to access some of these funds. Similar to the State Homeland Security Program, UOSI follows the same 6 national priority areas, and counties should work with their individual UOSIs to learn about what their unique priorities are. Sometimes the UOSI areas do not prioritize cybersecurity within their allocation, but they do offer other free services to support cybersecurity gaps. For example, the Bay Area UOSI has a regional contract with a provider to conduct local gaps and need cyber assessments and review incident response plans and offer recommendations. So you're going to want to be reaching out for those counties located in the listed UOSI areas for California. You're going to want to be reaching out and seeing what resources they have available to support your cybersecurity needs. One important note that I want to stress regarding both the State Homeland Security Program and the UOSI Security Program is cybersecurity is only one of the 6 national priorities. So if you have other projects that are responsive to some of the other priorities, also consider putting those forward as well.
Thanks so much, Heidi. I did want to clarify, because in comparison to the broadband infrastructure, it doesn't seem like there's many grants available to support cybersecurity projects. Do you have suggestions for counties on other resources available? How do we think about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, the bipartisan infrastructure law did create the state and local cybersecurity program, which is basically the county's best opportunity to access cybersecurity only funding. However, CSA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, does offer a bunch of free resources. CSA offers a range of cybersecurity assessments and evaluation, operational and resiliency tools, including providing information on cybersecurity practices, organizational management, and external dependencies, and other key elements to help counties provide a robust and resilient cybersecurity framework. These free resources offered by CSA are professional, no-cost assessments, which can be provided on request by counties of CSA. So this is a voluntary type of situation where counties can go to CSA's Cyber Resource Hub that's linked on the screen, and you can really go through each of the cyber assessment tools listed on the screen to access a free professional assessment from them on what your cybersecurity infrastructure is like. We can talk a little bit about each of these assessment tools. So the assessment and evaluation and standardization free resource is CSA's vulnerability management team offers these AESs, programs that are available to federal, state, and local and tribal territories and governments on critical infrastructure and federal agency partners. The program is designed to enable organizations to have a trained individual that can perform several cybersecurity assessments and reviews in accordance to industry and or federal information security standards. So it's an opportunity for you guys to get someone trained up in the county to be able to provide some assessments and reviews. There's vulnerability scanning opportunities, which evaluates external network presences by executing continuous scans of public, static IP version 4s for accessible service and vulnerabilities. These services provide weekly vulnerability reports and ad hoc alerts. So it's kind of a tool that you can layer into your existing cybersecurity program. The Cyber Resiliency Review is an interview-based assessment that evaluates an organization's operational resilience and cybersecurity practice. This assessment is derived from a resilient management model and a process for improvement of the model based on Carnegie Mellon's software that was developed for managing operational resilience. These reviews evaluate the maturity of your organization's capacity and capabilities in performing, managing, and measuring, and defining cybersecurity capabilities across several domains. Receiving these reviews will provide your organization with a more robust awareness of your cybersecurity posture and provide facilitation of improving enterprise-wide awareness of the need for effective cybersecurity management, a review of capabilities essential to the continuity of critical services during the operational changes and crises, and integrated peer performance comparisons for each of the 10 main issue areas covered in the assessment. And finally, you'll come out of this reporting tool with a comprehensive final report, which includes options for improvement for the county. Again, this assessment is available as a self-assessment or a CSAC facilitated assessment.
Great, thanks for reviewing those. We did get two questions in the chat I wanted to make sure we got to before going on. One harkens back to the broadband connectivity as a general theme. I'm not sure that any of us on the call are going to have the best, information to answer this, but if a county receives grant money, but there isn't an ISP providing service in the area, do we have any thoughts on how to approach that? I will say from a CSAC perspective, before if TFG wants to weigh in, that it's worth saying CSAC works directly with the California Emerging Technology Fund, which at the state level is working on trying to be a voice and a coordinator for as many entities as possible in the broadband space. They're helping on the BEAD, on ACP and other broadband programs. So it's possible that that raising this question to that type of entity might be helpful in that circumstance. Not sure if you guys had thoughts.
Yeah, Brian, I'll take that on. One of the things obviously that they can do, and I've seen examples across the country with this. The county can become basically own the network, build it out. They've got the ability to, the rights of way to make ready issues that would be easy for them to solve since they own a lot of those rights of ways. They can, build it, own it, but then lease it out or have an ISP basically become the one that will run it, operate it. If there isn't an ISP in the area, maybe in this particular case, you can work on incentivizing ISPs, especially wireless internet service providers. As I mentioned, these ISPs, you might be able to ease the potential their access to utility poles and rights of ways. You can, maybe conduct an engineering study, and that's another way to partner with a provider to basically identify some of the best locations to deploy broadband. You could also, in this case, they did win the grant, but I think you can explore financial incentives too to working with a partner. And this all kind of comes back to what Kristen said a little bit earlier on, making sure you have some community champions and supporters there that within the business community and local government and elsewhere that can basically be a sounding board. You've done some of the work there as far as looking at surveys of broadband need. So the potential internet service provider that might come in could see that, look, we've got quite a bit of interest here amongst potential subscribers. We could probably make a business model case out of this. So I think there's probably off the top of my head, some thoughts on that.
That was great. Really appreciate that. And we didn't know who asked that, but hopefully that was a helpful answer. That was several layers, several things to consider. Another question we got, moving back to cybersecurity, was who can counties in California contact to see how the state is going to allocate cybersecurity grants to counties? Is there something that counties need to submit to their state? Any
Is this
thoughts
for
on
the
that?
state and local program? Following this webinar, I can provide CSAC with a contact that I've been working with at Cal OES for that program for you guys to reach out and make sure that you're getting on that distribution list for input. And then for the most part, regarding kind of the state Homeland Security or the UASI programs, those are unique to each region. As I said, there's 6 UASIs in California. They're each going to have their own website that you can look at and reach out to them individually. So there's no, I guess, one-stop shop. You could reach out to Cal OES and ask them who you can talk to as another avenue. And we can drop some, in a follow-up email after this, drop some information about, some great contacts that counties might look up to.
All the tools you just went through, Heidi, there's a lot on assessment, on evaluation, in terms of free resources folks can look at. What funding is available to bridge the gaps that may ultimately come out of all that assessment and evaluation?
Unfortunately, these free tools do not provide the fixes. So they find your gaps, but they do not provide funding for that. It is likely county's best shot at getting, funding for these fixes is through some of the grant programs, specifically the state and local cybersecurity grant program that we touched upon today.
Dan says, when I checked into this a while back, I was told there's a lot of preparation already done and documents submitted previously, and basically their county could not participate. Any thoughts on how to assist with that? I'm not sure which program that's in reference to.
I'll handle this one. Dan, I'd like, what I'd suggest doing is actually setting up for our office hours and sitting down with our team. I'm not sure which program you're talking about, but we'd love to know more about what you're trying to accomplish, what projects or programs you're trying to implement in your county. And then I think we can help you debug, find the best funding opportunity, and then go from there. In general, some of the services that we do provide, that TFG does provide to counties, is the project readiness. So if there are elements of a project that need to be developed and taken care of prior to submitting an application, those are services that we can provide to counties to get that grant or to get that project grant ready. So I suggest signing up for office hours. You'll get one of our team on a situation like this where it is a very technical element. We bring in other members of TFG's team beyond just the grant side, like David, to come in on a issue specific question as well. So that would be my recommendation there. And to anybody can do that as well. If you've got projects along this line, these are complicated sort of multi-step processes. So with a lot of opportunities in different ways.
Yeah, great recommendation. And from the CSAC, I want to endorse that Christy and her team are a great resource for all the CSAC members, all counties that are available through this program. So please do reach out to try to schedule some CSAC sponsored conversations. We can dig further into your specific scenario. I'll switch now to a higher level question in terms of, we've just gone over cybersecurity. Now, for counties, what can they do to improve cybersecurity? Can we have some strategic advice?
Sure. So we thought about this and we kind of took it from a technical and a non-technical things that you can do right now. And so we reached out to some cybersecurity specialists and asked what these things are. So some suggestions that came out of our discussions were to establish comprehensive policies and procedures that are tailored to the specific needs of your county. So these policies should outline security measures, acceptable uses of technology, incident response protocols, and employee responsibilities. And this key to this should be a living document, and it should be regularly reviewed and updated to address any new emerging threats. And we all know it seems like there's always a new virus that's coming out causing problems. For training, you'll want to make sure to train all of your employees on cybersecurity best practices. And some of these are common sense, but they're good to make sure everyone is trained to learn how to identify and avoid any phishing emails, use strong passwords, practice safe browsing habits, report any suspicious activities immediately. Basically, you want to promote a culture of security awareness and then conduct regular training sessions to reinforce that cybersecurity knowledge. Another suggestion is to develop and regularly update incident response plans that will outline the steps to be taken in the unfortunate event of a cybersecurity breach. So that includes defining roles and responsibilities, establishing communication protocols, and then conducting regular readiness drills. And finally, to foster collaboration with other governments, other local governments, law enforcement agencies, and cybersecurity organizations. Here you can share best practices, threat intelligence, and resources to help identify any of these emerging threats and to improve your response capabilities. Some more technical actions that can help bolster your current cybersecurity efforts would be to conduct that risk assessment, to conduct a real thorough cybersecurity risk assessment that is faced by county governments. So you'll want to identify any vulnerabilities, evaluate any potential impacts, and then prioritize security efforts based on risk effort. And as part of that, once you have completed the risk assessment, to develop a risk management plan to mitigate and identify those risks effectively. Of course, you want to implement a robust network security measure system, including firewalls, intrusion detection systems, multi-factor authentication, and regular patching of software and firmware. Really, kind of the basics: use secure network protocols, strong encryption, access controls to protect sensitive data and systems from unauthorized access. And you'll also want to implement robust data backup protection measures. So do your regular data backups, offsite storage, and encryption of sensitive data, and then test those data backups to make sure that the data can be restored in the event of a cyber incident or a data loss.
First, we got a question in response to our commenting on office hours. I do want to make sure everyone knows what office hours are. So the CSAC Grants Initiative, we have first come, first served basis hours where CSAC has paid for a dedicated consulting team, the Ferguson Group folks you see on the call, to meet with you. If you go to csacgrantsinitiative.org, you can find under our free resources that office hours is one of the top free resources there. So please do check out csacgrantsinitiative.org and go to office hours. You can schedule a half-hour chat with typically one or more folks that are on this call, and we can dive into your particular issue. Can be cybersecurity, broadband, or any other grant-related item. So check that out. We did get another couple questions here. In terms of the SLCGP funds, how are those allocated to counties? Is there a list? Is it formula? Is it competitive? Can we speak to that?
Sure. So the guidelines as to how Cal OES is going to allocate the money out to to locals has yet to be revealed publicly. So unfortunately, at this time, we cannot provide any insight on that. All we know is that the state does have to give 80% of that funding and pass it through to local entities. So,
great. And then there was
another... I know the state is working on those rules right now, and hopefully they will be public soon, because I believe they'll be opening for competition, potential competition in 2024.
Awesome. And there was a follow-up question on the same funding. Is there a NOFO, a deadline application form? And the answer sounds like no, because that's TBD.
TBD,
Correct. Yep.
unfortunately, as of today.
Okay, so I think that's all of our questions in the chat here. I'll reaffirm what Christy had brought up and then what we had gotten to bring up again with the office hours, that everyone that's attending today as a CSAC member, as part of a California county, you can reach out to us on csacgrantsinitiative.org. You can email myself. We are going to follow up with an email to all attendees today, so you can respond directly to that or start a new thread with us. But we would love to keep the conversation going on your particular needs. So thanks for showing up today. And I'll hand it over to Christy to say thank you, because you guys are the real stars of the show here.
Oh, sure. No, thank you. This has been, I've really enjoyed watching the questions come in. Understanding how you guys are dealing with these issues on a county level is important to us as we continue to provide services on grants and build the repertoire of the services that we're able to offer to counties through the CSAC Grants Initiative. So thank you for the engagement. We know that this is very technical and these can be complicated issues. So we appreciate that you tuned in today. And as Brian said, please take advantage of those office hours. It's easy to sign up for. We can do it generally if you just have general questions, or if you have a specific project that you want to talk about. We can get you in front of our grants experts and we can start to work on that for you. We will also be attending the CSAC conference too. If you guys, if anybody is there in attendance, Heidi, Kristen, and I will be there in person. So looking forward to seeing anybody that does go to Oakland.
Someone in the comments said, wow, that's a great service to office hours. So I'll just publicly say that is correct. It is a great service. You should check it out. Yeah. And thanks so much to the Ferguson Group team, of course, and to David, who's first time joining us on the Grants Initiative side.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.